see them like this, for they keep mostly to themselves. It's not that they're secretive, but they are sensitive. They know that they're the last people on earth with whom we want to do business. They sense that we're uncomfortable around them, but they make us nervous. And so, like other ostracized groups, they tend to gather and party among themselves. Every facet of their trade is here. The embalming fluid specialists, the used hearse salesmen, the monument carvers, the coffin makers, the beauticians, and of course, the morticians. The funeral business is letting its hair down. In the Western world, the average family will be involved in a funeral about once every 13 years. So the men and women of the funeral business know we're coming. It's just a matter of when. They know that we will, all of us, one day make a journey like this one. There is, of course, the occasional exception. The founder of University College London, English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, has so far managed to avoid the traditional funeral. In fact, Dr. Bentham has managed to hang around the campus pretty well since his death in 1832. He sits upright in a wooden case in the hall. Jeremy Bentham has intrigued many British historians, but none more than death specialist Julian Lytton.
His idea, though, was absolutely fascinating. Not to have a funerary monument in your church, instead to use the individual's skeleton after having donated the body for private or public dissection, to use the skeleton as an armature for a wax figure. He called it an auto-icon. And these auto-icons could then be encased with a glass front and put in between the trees that lined the avenue that went up to your private house. And you could see all of your ancestors whenever you drove up into your home or out into town.
Bentham's skeleton never actually made it to the avenue of his home. It stayed forever in the closet at school. His present head, however, is not original. It's made of wax. His real head is kept in the office safe and only brought out on special occasions. Why do you think Bentham's head is now kept in a safe?
Well, because it looks rather hideous. It looks a little bit like a haggis with two glass eyes stuck in it. It wasn't a very good embalming process.
Jeremy Bentham was 84 years old when he died, but he still gets out every so often when college officials invite him to the occasional social function.
What does happen from time to time is he's taken along to the annual meeting of our debating society, and on occasion he's been recorded as present but not voting.
Didn't quite catch on, though, as an idea.
No, he was absolutely unique. It was a one-off, I'm afraid. It was his brainchild, and it died with him. It was great sadness.
And so in death, Dr. Jeremy Bentham remains quietly in his cupboard. It isn't exactly the way most of us will go. Most of us will end up here. This is the route Danielle Martel took following a tragic car accident. She had no heartbeat, no respiration, no brainwave activity. Danielle Martel knows what it's like to be dead.
It's great. I'm not saying go out and kill yourself, but I'm just saying it's very freeing. It's a wonderful, peaceful experience. It's you won't want to come back.
Martel had been declared dead and placed in a body bag for 45 minutes. But something was still very much alive.
As we went over the cliff, my soul separated from my body, and I went out of body. So it's almost like you think you're going to die, and then you feel this pulling sensation, and you're out, and you're free. And I saw the car going down the cliff, and my body being thrown out.
You saw this from above? I mean...
From, the only way I can explain this is with your spiritual body or the soul. And as I left my body, suddenly I started traveling very fast. I felt that I was like pure energy, a pure form of energy that was traveling at an incredible speed, like faster than the speed of light. And just, it's like a void, almost like people could talk about a tunnel. It's that kind of thing, and you're traveling very, very fast. And all of a sudden I started to slow down, and I stopped and became aware of what I was, that I was this pure form of energy.
What did it feel like?
It felt very peaceful. You feel a great sense of freedom. It's a wonderful feeling.
When the body bag gave a sudden jump, the morgue attendants, with some embarrassment, rushed her back to emergency. As soon as she was able to explain where she'd been, the psychiatrists were called in to come up with a rational explanation.
Well, the main thing was just how do you know that this really happened? What makes you think that could really be real? And I said, because I experienced it. Because I thought, well, how do you know you're not dreaming? How do you know you're not imagining this? And I said, I know. It's like you know. They could have had 100 psychiatrists in there trying to convince me that I was imagining it. No one can alter that for me. No one can change that for me. I know what happened was real.
Danielle Martel is convinced that she came back from the dead. And here, in an industrial park in Scottsdale, Arizona, they're hoping to make that a regular occurrence. Here they believe that they will eventually be able to bring us all back to life. All they have to do, as soon as death occurs, is freeze us like human popsicles and keep us frozen until the time of our thawing. This is the world of cryonics and the offices of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation. Its vice president is Ralph Whalen.
We want to cool evenly all over the whole body. We want to cool slowly. This is why the cooling process is going to take a total of about a week. Once we've cooled as low as we can go in that silicone oil bath, then we're going to move on and we're going to begin vapor cooling with liquid nitrogen. For that, we use this here, which is what we call our cool down unit. We would actually put the patient in this unit, not actually put the person into liquid nitrogen, but instead they would simply be over liquid nitrogen, and we would be using the nitrogen vapor to cool the patient down. That would go on for about 4 or 5 days. Over that period of time, the person will be dropped about 300 degrees, down to 320 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, or about 196 below 0 Celsius. Once we've cooled down to that temperature, we're ready to actually submerge the patient in liquid nitrogen and move him into his long-term home, which would be one of these units right here. We call these our whole body storage units, or whole body storage doers. Each one of these can store 4 whole body patients. And we don't actually put the patient directly in here. First, actually, what we do is put the person into 2 cold weather sleeping bags for thermal protection, so that as we move the patient, he's not going to experience warming. Then we're going to go ahead and put the patient into one of these. And this is what we call an aluminum storage pod. One person would go in here, and this gives us the mechanical protection that we need to move somebody around without worrying about maybe the person bumping up against somebody, because keep in mind now they're in a solid state, and you can cause damage to somebody just by bumping around. But once we've secured somebody into the mechanical protective device here, the pod, then we're going to go ahead and lower this pod, and perhaps 3 others, this can hold a total of 4, into one of these units here. And the real beauty of these units is their simplicity. Okay, they're not refrigerators. They're not refrigeration devices. They don't require electricity. They don't plug in. They're really just like large thermos bottles. Okay, all you have to do is put liquid nitrogen in them and allow it to boil off at its own rate, which is reduced because these are very well insulated. Okay, about 1 inch away from my hand here, it's about 320 degrees below zero. But I can't feel that because this is very well insulated, and that's what keeps that liquid nitrogen from just boiling off at a very rapid rate.
These people that are in here, and some of them have been in here for many years now, they're suspended upside down in a sleeping bag, frozen solid.
That's correct. Yeah, we store them upside down. There's a very pragmatic reason for that, okay? These units here require regular additions of liquid nitrogen, okay? Now, if for some reason our liquid nitrogen supply was interrupted, then after about 2 months, maybe the level will have dropped to the point where the tops of their feet will start to be exposed. But it would be several more months before their brain, the most important part, the part where their identities and their memories and their personalities are stored, it'd be several more months before that actually started to warm up, and that's the critical area.
Hanging upside down in these drums are 10 frozen dead bodies. And over here, 17 frozen heads of people who presume that science will create new bodies for them at the time of their thawing. There are also 12 cats and dogs. Alcor is convinced that one day these people and their pets will walk out of the storage area and into the Arizona heat. There is, of course, a cost. How much for a brain to be frozen here?
We charge $50,000 for what we call neurosuspension.
And a full body?
$120,000. And I should point out that most of our members pay for that. They're taking out a life insurance policy to make Alcor the beneficiary, and that's the way the payment gets transferred at the time of death.
So $120,000 for the full body. Now, how much for a pet?
It really depends on the size of the animal. The volume of an animal varies much more than the volume of a person. It can be anywhere from $1,500 to $30,000 or $40,000.
30 or 40,000 would be for a large dog?
If you wanted to have a whole body suspension of a large dog, yeah.
30,000 for a large dog, 120,000 for a body, and 50,000 for a brain.
That's about right, yeah. Sounds like a lot of money, huh?
The cost of death has always been an issue. People have been complaining about it for centuries. But Julian Lytton, curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, argues that we should look at the bigger picture.
But I don't really think that one should worry about the expense, truly worry about the expense of a funeral, provided you've been able to have given to you that quality of dignity that you wish to purchase. Of course, whatever you want in this world is available, provided you've got the money and you've got the time to wait. But if you think of a funeral of £3,000 in comparison, say, to a wedding of £10,000, and a wedding takes as long to perform with the breakfast afterwards as does a funeral with the breakfast after it, and if you bear in mind that 1/3 of marriages end in divorce, and yet we've still to hear of a funeral that's broken up, then I would think an expenditure of £3,000 is not a bad bargain, even by today's standards.
If you're not quite ready for the grave, but are still looking for a bargain, you might try picking up a souvenir of death from the LA Coroner's office, where Marilyn Lewis has opened a new store called Skeleton in the Closet.
This is the original one. This is what launched our career.
Now, when did you start this?
Last August. It was just an idea that if we got a little publicity, we could probably do pretty well, and then all the money goes to our youthful drunk driving program. But it went very well.
You made a killing.
We made a killing. Well, we're still making it.
What else have you got there, Marilyn?
Okay, besides the beach towels, which were probably our popular item, we have the mugs with a little skeleton man on it, dressed up like Sherlock. And they are in black and in the white. And we also added our own Coroner seal mug. It's really nice gold seals on both sides. Plus, we've got our travel mug with our body on it. It's a really good one. And also our T-shirts. It has our Coroner seal on the front, and on the back is our little skeleton, little Sherlock. He's our detective. And besides that, not to forget our caps.
Now, how much are the caps?
The caps are $12, and they have Coroner on the back.
Marilyn Lewis has made over $200,000 so far, selling beach towels, t-shirts, and baseball caps. She's moving on now to underwear, pens, toe tag keyrings, and has already made one franchise deal. The death business is suddenly hot. And no wonder. The baby boomers are coming. In the next few decades, the funeral business will expect more dead customers than ever before in its history. And the funeral business thrives on new dead customers. The generation that spent most of its life striving to be different is now growing ever closer to that final universal trip, which will make us all the same. We can try to postpone it, but it's unlikely we will avoid it. A fact which has not escaped the stock market. The funeral business in the States and Canada is worth about $8 billion a year, big enough for analysts like Ron Jerome to be bullish on death.
Well, they say it's a business where you'll never run out of clients, and I certainly, with the aging population, demographics such as they are and the rest of it, it's a wonderful opportunity for a company that's well managed, who's in a good business niche, to do very well.
Do you find a lot of people are investing in the funeral business? I mean, is it an easy thing to sell investors?
Well, you have to sell it sort of tongue-in-cheek, and that's the way we've done it around here. We argue that everybody who has an RSP should have at least 100 shares of their favorite funeral service company in, because at the end of the day it may do you an extra service. So. But no, it's a good business. Because it's a growth industry and not a lot of investors are growth stock purchasers, it's not for everybody. But certainly the companies in the industry have done tremendously well over the last, well, 20 years.
You know, elaborate funeral homes with expensive caskets, Cadillac hearses.
As the death business grows, the big move now is to get to all those prospective customers before someone else offers them a better deal.
We come to you and make all of the arrangements in the comfort of your home. From simple cremation with no service to a complete funeral with burial at significantly lower costs. An affordable alternative to expensive funeral homes. Personal alternative funeral services.
Lawrence, I think there should be some further emphasis on we come to you in your home. Can you try it again?
Sure. We come to you and make all of the arrangements in the comfort of your home. Really what we've done is we've modernized funeral service as we know it. We've taken the mumbo jumbo out of it. We've made purchasing funeral service very consumer friendly. We go to the family home rather than the family having to come to a funeral home. We have a right-sized facility for the 90s, for the consumer of the 90s.
This is their right-sized facility for the 90s. Less of a funeral parlour, more of a commercial office in the industrial wasteland outside Vancouver. They claim they don't need a fancy mortuary. They have everything they require in Ron Young's For the 90s briefcase.
In that briefcase, we have every tool and component that we may need. The first package is what will are all the different arrangement forms and documents that are required at the time of the arrangement at the home. We have a full binder which is indexed with all the information that we need to know to be able to help and assist the family choose a casket. We simply put the price list on the table with the family, pictures and descriptions of caskets, of flowers for the family, so they can actually choose flowers, and cards from laser jet printed, computer scan pictures, a map to know exactly where we're going around the city. When we come to payment, also can be a little bit of a sensitive time with the family and the arrangement, but it is the 90s, and we are here for the consumer of the 90s, and many of our consumers and families today would like to pay by credit card. So we do offer, again, that service, and we just have a very simple little handheld transactor to be able to receive the credit card and to insert the document or the voucher.
Their advertising for the funeral of the 90s might make you long for the good old days.
If you wanted a good funeral, it's best to go to the 18th century. Admittedly, there was an enormous amount of black that was being worn, but it was a very high quality of silks and taffetas and satins. And the coffins themselves would have been carried on the shoulders of the bearers provided by the undertakers through the streets. The idea of having horse transport to take them from the house to the church was quite unusual. And you'd have this foot cavalcade with the coffin being offered up on the shoulders of the bearers and an enormous black velvet pall hemmed with white being thrown over coffin and bearers, with the pall being pulled back at the front so only the two leading bearers could see where they were going, and the rest of it traveled along the street like a large sable caterpillar. And sewn onto the pall itself would have been canvas escutcheons, which would be the coats of arms of the individual, if they didn't have their own coats of arms, and the funeral directors would quite happily fake them for you. And perhaps on top of the coffin you might have a tray of feathers, which would be indicative of the person's status, and then all the mourners following on foot behind.
Even for the poor this would happen?
No, not for the poor. No, the poor were buried with a quality of dignified yet quiet solemnity.
You mean they were just shoved in a box in a grave somewhere?
Let's say dignified solemnity, yes.
Like most businesses, the funeral business relies on each new generation to carry on the tradition
This is our
and the
casket
profession.
selection room.
And these are the men and women
This is a room
of the new generation of funeral
in which
director.
I strongly advise you prepare your families very carefully before you bring them in. To us, we often take for granted the impact of a casket selection room. But to our families, it's a very scary room. And I think it's very important that each of you take time to prepare your families properly before you bring them into a selection room. What I'm showing you here right now is a
Today,
solid
the funeral
hardwood
apprentices
casket.
are out in the field
Basically, there are
to
two
get the
different types
lowdown
of
on
caskets.
coffins, caskets, and
protective
urns.
casket
And there's a lot to
non-protective
learn.
casket.
Probably much
Now, if we
more
walk right over
than many
here,
of us wish to know.
we'll have a look at a 32-ounce copper casket. Now, this casket does seal, as you can see by the gasket here, going around the exterior of the casket. Also here, wherever the casket has an opening. This casket, when I say it's a 32-ounce copper casket, what I'm telling you is that per every square foot of this casket is 32 ounces of copper. This casket also has the construction of a box spring and mattress inside of it. Let me just show you that. You can see that this casket actually has a box spring and a mattress. This is movable and adjustable so that we can casket the deceased in a very natural manner for presentation at either the viewing or the visitation. Any questions?
Although many of the apprentices come from families already in the business, more and more candidates are coming in off the street, choosing the one profession most of us spend a lifetime trying to avoid.
Do any of your friends think it was strange for you to go into this business?
Friends, family.
Your family thought it was strange too?
Yes.
Very concerned about our well-being, about how it's going to affect ourselves.
In what way?
I just know my own immediate family, they're very concerned about how the funeral service was going to affect me, whether I guess the typical undertaker outlook of a funeral director, and whether I was going to turn out to be that stereotype.
Which would be what exactly?
Just the undertaker image of always waiting for a death, the morbid personality, and basically, I guess, no lifestyle outside the funeral home.
And that, of course,
is not true. I find funeral directors today are very involved in the community, and
they're a fun bunch.
Right.
The undertaker is quite an interesting man because if you look up Dr. Johnson's 18th century dictionary, see what undertaker means, it's a contractor. And that's exactly what he was doing. He was acting under contract to the relatives of the deceased to provide everything that made for a funeral. He'd negotiate with the coffin maker. He would then negotiate with upholders for any of the palls that were required. If there was horse transport required to take you from your own home to a place that was distant, he'll be able to negotiate with the carriage proprietors and also with the livery stable. So he was undertaking a contract on your behalf.
The funeral director's apprenticeship lasts for 4 years, half of it spent here at embalming school.
Now, for our purposes here, we don't get an opportunity to embalm a body in class and have a period of hours for it to firm up to the extent that is desirable in the event that the application of restorative art wax is necessary.
Here they
So
learn the
best bet
embalming
for
and
us
restorative
is
techniques they will
simply
need to
solid
master before graduation.
latex, head
How
such
to
as
remodel
this
a
is
lost
to be
nose or
manufactured
chin.
for the purposes
How
that
to
we are
measure the
using it
features.
for here today.
How to lay out a
What we're
corpse.
doing here is we're using what's called a plastic surgeon's putty wax. The most advantageous tool that we can use is to have the benefit of a color photograph, or perhaps a couple of color photographs from the next of kin, to assist us with the individual characteristics of the person that we're working on. And the more observations we can make sometimes from the photographs we have to work with, the greater potential there is for success in the preparation room.
Chief Instructor Colin McSween has embalmed over 5,000 people.
When you first started doing this, was it scary?
Yeah, I think so. I lost my appetite for a month, which anybody that's seen me eat finds that hard to believe, but I couldn't eat for quite a while. And it was just very different. It's unlike any other kind of work you can do.
McSween teaches them more than embalming. He instructs them in the unwritten rules of their trade. You'll notice, for example, there's a certain sartorial elegance here you don't find with most students. Sweatshirts and jeans are frowned upon in embalming class.
We come to class as we come to work. We are expected to, I guess, quote unquote, dress professionally. And if we want a good grade, then we come in our suits for class participation.
And so, dressed for the profession they have embraced, they become acquainted with the various chemicals which they will one day inject into the arteries of the dead to give the impression of sleep.
Case may involve in terms of medical closure. Then normally that physician or they would notify the next of kin.
I think embalming works.
No, of course it doesn't. It would work if you're able to have it done in the same way an Egyptian mummy was, if you've got 90 days to soak the body in warm natron, and if you've got the 15 or 25,000 pounds to pay for it. The nearest person we know that's been recently embalmed in that way was Eva Perron in 1953. But as she's now in a private burial vault with the shaft infilled with concrete and with steel chippings, I don't think anyone's going to start drilling that up to see how well it's lasted. The standard embalming is really done so that it can make a corpse palatable for handling by people who are in the funeral home. Also, too, what it's meant to do is to give a lifelike appearance, to put some colour back into the facial features of the deceased when it comes for the family to view the remains. So what we're looking for is perhaps a slight hiatus on the visible process of decomposition for perhaps 14 to 21 days, no more than that.
Hello and welcome to Hollywood. After London tours invite you to see the homes of the stars. See the homes of the
Outside the Chinese Theatre on Hollywood Boulevard, the tourists congregate to catch a glimpse of the rich, a smile from the famous.
Chanel and Fred Hammond. Upon your return to Hollywood, have your film developed as a one-hour photo, or visit our gift shop.
For the tour guide, it's a chance to wrestle a dollar from those well-documented lifestyles of the Hollywood stars. But there's also a buck to be made, it appears, from the death styles. It's been called the tackiest tour in America, a criticism of which they are particularly proud.
Enjoy your day in Hollywood.
Dearly beloved, we welcome you on board Graveline Tours. You are about to view the remains of scores of Hollywood's spooky and kooky attractions, most of which were dug up exclusively for this tour. Every site you will be seeing today has been researched in painstaking detail and thoroughly documented.
Now we're looking at this tan hotel to your right. The third air conditioner from the right on the bottom was Janis Joplin's room.
The Graveline tour will not only point out the room where Janis Joplin overdosed, it'll slow down as you pass the bar where she had her last drink. It will take you to the streets where dead stars once lived, to the locations of famous murders, to the prime Hollywood suicide sites. They've just added the O.J. Simpson house.
She went straight to her room, number 105.
The tour is not exactly popular, however, with the residents of Beverly Hills.
They say when we pull up in front of a house that the property value plummets 50% immediately. So they don't care for us too much there, though. But they're usually polite enough. They just don't They just don't. They try not to acknowledge us.
Tour guide Scott Michaels moved here from Chicago so he could drive the hearse and get that little bit closer to the stars of Hollywood, both alive and dead.
Now, I got very fortunate to get the job of my dreams when I came out here. This is why I'm here. But I have no desire to live here otherwise. I enjoy visiting, but I've never really had any desire to live here except to do this.
But why are you so obsessed with people's deaths?
Obsessed is, I think, has negative connotations to it. I think very interested is better. And I don't know, it's just probably because I think death will be a wonderful experience, and plus these people are royalty, you know, they're the closest things that Americans have to royalty. So of course they're interested in every single aspect of their life, where they work out or where they died, or, you know, they go to the restaurants to see them and everything. It's just every single aspect of their life is scrutinized completely, even their garbage, you know. It's odd, but it's great.
Even in death, there is no escape for the royalty of Hollywood. And for those who once reigned as queen, the curiosity follows them right into the funeral vault. At the exclusive Westwood Cemetery, top billing still belongs to Marilyn Monroe. Why do you think people want to come and see the grave of Marilyn Monroe, or the grave of anybody else for that matter?
I think it's just a curiosity, kind of, you know, some of these people have a fascination for these people.
Westwood is run by Rob Pierce.
You know, a lot of people are so drawn to the personalities, and as the media picks up on them, it creates an interest, and they want to come see it for themselves, I guess.
There are lots of stars buried at Westwood, but it is through Marilyn Monroe's vault that the fans continue to slip get-well cards and love letters. How the other queens of Westwood react to being upstaged by Marilyn, we can only wonder.
I would say we get now 2 or 3 tour buses a day that'll either park outside or come into the park, and people will get out and walk across the park here and visit the spot. So it's become a living for the tour guides, I think.
You should charge them for entrance.
I thought about it.
Hey, can you make a living doing this?
Sure, I'm doing all right with it. It's okay. I'm not able to buy a mansion in Beverly Hills yet, but I'm doing okay.
He may not have his mansion, but he does get the chance to show off what the tour guides call the mother of all cemeteries, California's Forest Lawn. It's at Forest Lawn that death and show business joined hands. This is where they changed the very nature of the North American cemetery business, where graveyards became memorial parks, and memorial parks became big business. Forest Lawn was the first to put up billboard advertising. They were the first to offer a buy now, die later payment plan. They were the first to build their own churches, and when they weren't being used for funerals, they rented them out for weddings and christenings. They packed their 5 memorial parks with ornate Italian statues. They put together death-themed exhibits and museums. They added music and entertainment, and they urged America to spend more time visiting and discovering the universal answers which only Forest Lawn could provide. They left no marketing stone unturned. When they ran out of space in Babyland, they opened Lullaby Land. Forest Lawn is the final resting place for over 500,000 Californians. Around here, they call it the Disneyland of Death. Forest Lawn didn't just evolve. Everything here is part of a vision, a master plan, the brainchild of Dr. Hubert Eton, who ran Forest Lawn for 50 years and preferred to be known simply as the builder. He died in 1966. David Sloan of the University of Southern California has made a study of Forest Lawn and of Hubert Eton.
He was a visionary, and I think we have to give him credit for that. I mean, real visionary. He was the first person to put together the modern business of the cemetery. Because what he did was what I call one-stop shopping. Before Eton, you had to go to the funeral home, you had to go to the florist to get your flowers, you had to go to the cemetery to buy your plot, you had to go to the monument dealer to buy your monument, you had to go to another person to buy your vault. You had to go, it was completely decentralized. Eton, between 1917 and the 1930s, gradually consolidated that into his one place, Forest Lawn.
But of all their achievements in the cemetery business, Forest Lawn's major claim to fame is that it was the first to put a stop to tombstones, preferring instead the uniform bronze plaques, which don't get in the way of the view and which give the impression that in death, if not in life, we are all finally equal.
Anybody could afford to be in his cemetery and buy a plaque. That meant you didn't have the Rockefellers over here with their huge monuments and the poor people over, the middle class particularly, because that's what he was interested in, not truly poor, the middle class over here with their tiny little monuments overshadowed. Virtually everyone is the same. Now, in reality, he fudges. I mean, if you were there, you saw that he has the enclosed gardens where at one time the only way you could get into them was with a gold key. There's places that are clearly more prestigious to be buried than others, and I'm sure, although I don't have the figures because Forest Lawn won't give them out, that they were more expensive at one time than at other times. But he argued that the cemetery should return to being a place for everyone, and that the bronze memorial was one way of doing that.
Although they won't release the figures, Forest Lawn is thought to bury 9,000 people a year. In a normal work week, that's about 1 every 15 minutes. If the average funeral and grave costs around $3,500, then Forest Lawn is grossing $31 million a year. But not all cemeteries in the Western world are making as tidy a profit as Forest Lawn. This is Highgate Cemetery in London, and in the early 1970s, the unthinkable happened here. They ran out of money. Capitalism and free enterprise failed, leaving Highgate's most famous resident chuckling all the way into eternity. Weeds and vandals soon took over Highgate, and for several years it seemed there was no salvation. It was simply abandoned. But then the ladies of the community decided to reclaim the cemetery. They tidied up the Egyptian avenue of catacombs, they swept the Lebanon circle. They put the angels back on their pedestals, picked up the tombstones, and then they unleashed that most dangerous British commodity, the volunteer chair lady. Known locally as Mrs. Tombstones, she's reigned over the 52,000 mausoleums and graves for nearly 20 years. But there are those who claim that the Queen of Highgate, Mrs. Jean Pateman, has become completely captured by the cemetery.
Oh, yes, and I think the London Natural History Society have listed about 300 different forms of plant life here. The question is keeping the balance, because after all, if I pull off all the dead dandelion heads, the bumblebees won't be very thrilled. On the other hand, if they go into puffballs, they'll have millions more. So it's the balance factor. One wants it to be wild, one wants to find that there are all sorts of intriguing plants here, and that anything that's growing like that, which softens a very hard line, is allowed to flourish without somebody coming along with a pair of secateurs and going snip, 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 snip.
Jean, you're here 7 days a week.
Usually, yes. Now, in the last few years, since it's become quite a busy business. But in the early years, we were here, say, once a month or once a week. But those were the days when you were trying to mould public opinion to realize that cemeteries as a whole, not just Highgate, were repositories of Victorian social history, of precious landscape material, and as a resource to be used by discreet travellers, not tourists.
Although they're now trying to limit the number of discreet travellers, there were in fact 75,000 tourists here last year to admire the sleeping lion and the other graves of the famous and powerful. But no matter how famous or powerful, it's unlikely the ladies of Highgate will let anyone enter here who hasn't paid the price.
Good morning. Do you want to come in this side?
Yes, please.
You want to see Karl Marx?
Yes, please.
Right, fine.
One ticket.
That'll be all right.
Thank you very much.
You want a ticket as well? Have you got a camera? Have you got a camera?
No.
No? You sure?
Positive.
Right, thank you. You go down that way.
Very good, thank you. Why are you worried about them having a camera?
They have to pay another £1 if they have a camera.
I'm sorry?
They have to pay £1 for a camera permit if they have a camera.
Among those buried here is the Canadian power broker Donald Smith, Lord Strathcona. He was the one who drove in the last spike on the Canadian Pacific Railway. It must warm his heart to know he's still at the hub of industry and commerce, for it is from his mausoleum that they collect the £1 entrance fee and the extra £1 for the camera permit. Do you get a lot of people complaining about being charged £1 to get in?
They're not charged £1 to get in here. They pay at least £3 to come on a guided tour, and then they're confronted by one of us with a green collecting box.
And the founder of the cemetery, Stephen Geary, felt it was very important to have an impressive feature in the cemetery, and so this...
The tours are available 7 days a week, 3 and sometimes 4 times a day. Highgate is a business once more. But Mrs. Tombstones has no ambition to turn the place into the manicured splendour of Forest Lawn. For Highgate, she has quite a different philosophy.
It's rather like looking after a gigantic garden with an intriguing follies and buildings in it. There will always be a lot to be done, and this very carefully controlled balance between the managed neglect and the manicured image which we want to avoid is the significant one.
Managed neglect?
Exactly.
Although it's hardly a burning social issue, we're fast running out of space in our city cemeteries. Around the middle of the 19th century, when the church graveyards began filling up, city cemeteries simply moved to the outskirts, where land was cheap. Then, as the cities caught up with them, our cemeteries invariably filled up again, forcing the living and the dead further out into the suburbs. Our connections with the occupied city cemeteries are destined to become blurred, as there will be, eventually, fewer people who remember who is buried where. Fewer visitors to spend the occasional Sunday afternoon tending forgotten graves. The driveways and avenues of city cemeteries are now less likely to be viewed as the place of ideal remembrance, and remembered instead as the ideal place for the first driving lesson. The word cemetery comes from the Greek for resting place. The concept was they would serve as temporary locations between this world and wherever it was we were moving on to. We would, of course, need to be comfortable while we waited. Gordon Ropchan runs Evergreen Caskets.
You've got quite a number here.
Yes, we do.
Why do you keep so many in stock?
Well, there's about 4 million deaths a year in North America, and we have to have a lot of caskets on hand at any one time because we don't know when somebody's going to die and when they're going to need them. They'll usually, when they need them within a couple of days, and they're not going to wait around.
So business is pretty steady.
Pretty steady, yes.
There are all kinds of models to suit all kinds of tastes and pocketbooks. The most expensive mahogany will set you back around $12,000, but they also carry the cloth-covered, pine, the environmentally friendly, and the hermetically sealed metal caskets, which let in no moisture, but are frowned upon by Julian Lytton.
What normally happens is, if truth be told, that the body itself will decompose and it will break itself down to skeletal. But what is unable to happen if you're going to put someone into a metallized, hermetically sealed casket, there is no possibility for the liquids associated with decomposition to drain through and to go into the ground itself. So you're left with this rather interesting mess of a sort of, well, marmite-colored, swarfiga, which is a hand-cleansing liquid. It smells deliciously putrid and is nothing more than marinated human crud. No, I think I'd like to have a coffin any day, or better still, perhaps a shroud burial straight into the ground.
But coffins, caskets, and shrouds aren't foremost in their minds tonight. For tonight, the apprentices are graduating. At the annual convention, dinner dance, and graduation, a new generation of funeral director is being welcomed into the brotherhood of the funeral. Each graduate receives a certificate, a few words of congratulations, and some free samples of the latest embalming fluids. There are special sponsored awards for the most improved student, for the best in internal organic research, for the one who showed the highest ideals and ethics, and for the one most likely to succeed. In celebration, the funeral directors will dance their way into the night. But it's unlikely that tomorrow's customers will ever hear of their parties. For tomorrow, the Bugs Bunny ties and the red dresses will be back in the closet, and they'll return to business as usual, playing their role in the most ancient of our rituals, choreographing the last steps in the ultimate human dance. They make their living in dark suits and solemn faces, and are destined to remain forever in that most unloved of professions. And yet, we'll remain forever curious about the intricacies of their trade, strangely fascinated in what they do and how they do it. Just as long as they're not doing it to us. At least, not quite yet.
It is a topic which people do find fascinating. Also, too, apart from birth, it is the only social ritual which is going to be common to everybody. Not everyone chooses to get married. Not everyone is baptized. But by Jove, everyone dies.